As Dr. Van Lopik mentioned to you, we're doing some improvisational shifting of the program. You may wonder what prompted that, and I will share with you what's prompted that. Marshall Pecor, the forester of the Menominee Forest, was scheduled to give an opening address. Unfortunately, Marshall cannot be here today because last week 300 million board feet of timber was blown down on the Menominee Forest, and it's prize hardwood. It's maples and ash and the high quality hardwoods that the forest is renowned for producing. And so, as you might guess, every forester on the Menominee Nation is out there today very busy because their challenge will be to schedule the removal of that blowdown and get it to the mill and to the market before it stains and deteriorates in quality. So that's why we've been doing a little bit of juggling. And we will still have that information provided, and hopefully you'll get to meet Marshall on Wednesday when we go to tour the forest, and you can share your questions with him then. To make sure that we still address this issue of the Menominee sustainability tradition and history, and address Menominee Tribal Enterprises forest management strategy, we'll be having a combined presentation by Dr. Verna Fowler, the founding president of College of Menominee Nation, and Dr. Geraldine Greeno, a member of the Menominee Tribal Enterprises Board of Directors, rather than the presentation by Marshall. And again, on Wednesday, we're hopeful that he's going to be available while we're doing the field trip to the forest to share his experience with you. Right now, I thought we would take a bit of a break, and I want to remind you that the bathrooms are located out here. There are coffee and light refreshments for you. And so let's take a 15-minute break and return here in 15 minutes to hear about the Menominee tradition and Menominee forest management. This is always my favorite part of any program, because it gives me an opportunity to share with you the experience of knowing a woman who is noted for her commitment, for her vision, and for her excellent administration of the College of Menominee Nation. Dr. Verna Fowler received her baccalaureate degree from Silver Lake University, went on to the University of North Dakota, where she received her master's and PhD. She was a Patricia Harris fellow and holds other honorary degrees bestowed by other universities. She's the founding president of College of Menominee Nation. And the fact that there is a Sustainable Development Institute, that there is a college, and that there is a new set of aspirations and expectations in that Native community is a testimonial to her vision. Please welcome Dr. Verna Fowler, President of College of Menominee Nation.
Thank you, Dr. Youngbear, for the wonderful introduction. Let me first begin by welcoming all of you here. It is just a thrill and just a joy to see you coming from the four corners of the world to share with the Menominee people and the other indigenous people of this country. And so I'm very pleased that you are here. And I want to thank Melissa Cook, our current director of the Sustainable Development Institute, her staff, and Dr. Holly Youngbear, who started with the College of Menominee Nation as the director for our sustainable development, for bringing this conference and the previous conference and future conferences to fruition. When I was just begun the college, maybe we had been, I don't know, 5 years old or whatever, I don't know. But I was sitting in my office preparing, approving staff travel and bills and so on, and as I look at stuff and look at money, I start muttering under my breath, why do I have to do this? Well, one of the things that came up was staff travel to a sustainable development conference. And I was sitting there muttering under my breath when Dr. Youngbear walked into my office. And so she, well, boss, what's the problem now? I said, why do I have to spend all this money and send people all over the place to learn about sustainable development when people of this world should be coming here to Menominee to learn about sustainable development? And so this is the result of much of that. So I'm a little bit more careful now when I say things to Dr. Youngbear. My part of the agenda is to share with you how Menominee happened to get into the sustainable yield management of their forest. It didn't just drop down from heaven. There were events that sort of helped and channeled us toward that, and plus people and other aspects of our culture. Now, one of the primary themes you'll hear through all of this is the adaptability, the flexibility, and the determination of the Menominee people. And today, you will see that determination, that flexibility, and that adaptability in action even. Our reason being, we've had a major windstorm on our reservation, and our next speaker, our Chief Forester for Menominee Tribal Enterprise, Marshall Pecor, could not be here today. He is at the damage site, and maybe they'll take you there to see it on Wednesday. So I always do what when I'm in a jam. When I was in kindergarten and going through grade school and could never figure out what my studies were about, I always called on Jerry Greeno, come and help me. And she'd come. When I got expelled from high school and I needed to find another high school, I went to Jerry Greeno and said, Jerry Greeno, help me. So I stayed overnight with her. She took me to a new high school, introduced me to everybody. She was there to help me. When the tribe asked me to start a college, it took me a while, but I traced her down in Oklahoma. I said, Jerry Greeno, come and help me. And so today I have to yell the same thing. Jerry Greeno, Dr. Jerry Greeno, come and help me. Because what we're doing, because our Chief Forester can't be here, and you will probably meet him on Monday, a remarkable man. Dr. Greeno, as I said, has been my childhood friend. That's one of her most famous claims to glory. But she has served as the academic dean at the College of Menominee Nation for about 5-6 years. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a degree in curriculum instruction, has been a lifelong teacher, and she also ran for the Menominee Tribal Enterprises, which is our sawmill and forest management corporation, and was elected to their board of directors. So she has currently is serving on the board of directors for Menominee Tribal Enterprises, which manages and oversees the sawmill and oversees the forestry operations. And she is also the former chairman of the board of that corporation. So, Dr. Jerry Greeno, come and help me. As I said, you'll see Menominee flexibility and determination and adaptability in operation this morning.
Can I introduce the other board members?
Absolutely.
Okay. What I would like to do, we have 2 more board members here. Linda Caldwell, Davy Jane Peters in the back. Thank you. Thank you.
Today, what we would like to do is just share with you a story. Sit back and relax. Menominees are known for their stories. So we are going to tell you a story, and it's the story of the Menominee people, as I said, their determination, their flexibility, their astuteness, and their adaptability. So the purpose of my talk this morning is to respond to this question. I need a slide, Dr. Brina. This question in terms of how did the Menominee happen to end up in leaders in sustainable development? And Dr. Greeno and I can share with you this story this morning and indicate the factors that led us to this current position where we're at, sharing with you the story of the Menominee people. So, the first one, our Menominee model of sustainability is derived from our history, and it's also derived from modern practices. It would be a little bit difficult in some instances, many instances, to use this model because it is so innate and so much a part of the Menominee people and their culture. That is not to say, however, that there are aspects of the model that other people can take for their communities. So, Nick, where are you at? When asked about the land, it's the land that has held us together as a people. It's the land that has sustained us. It's the land that has brought us to the forefront in terms of Menominee sustainability. And so it was our chief grizzly bear way back when they were negotiating with the federal government to get lands for the New York Indians, when he stood up and said, "This land is our life," and that pretty much sums up the entire aspect of it. But that doesn't mean our talk is over at this point. What we're going to do is first we have to give you a little bit of our history so you understand some of the factors and forces, and then we'll go a little bit into our culture and our belief system, and you'll see how sustainability happened to become a part of the Menominee. You want to give a little bit of our history or original? Go right ahead.
Okay. The Menominee, the original people in the state of Wisconsin, people who are practicing our culture, living with the seasons. We're called people of the wild rice because that's how we are called by other people. We've done a lot of wild ricing, but it was the Ojibwe who referred to us as people of the wild rice. Our claim to fame, as I tell people in the whole world, is because of our sustainability and our forest management practices. But our claim to fame among other tribes in the United States is that we were a terminated tribe, but restored. We valued who we were as Indian people and would not allow the federal government to erase us from their list. We're famous in Wisconsin because we are indigenous to the state of Wisconsin. We didn't get to come here from New York, Norb Hill. We didn't come here from we didn't come from the south or east or west. We have always lived in this region, as we say, and many say from time immemorial. We still are traditional people. We have done a lot of things. We have a very rich history in who we are, and we preserve and protect that. I'm not sure where Dr. Fowler was going to go with all of the history because we can go on and on and on.
Can I just take this comment? Yeah.
Yes.
Archaeological records show that the Menominee have been in this area for at least between 10 to 12,000 years. And living in this area, but they They generally agree that there were early people living here and that those early people were probably the forerunners of the Menominee or were the Menominee themselves. They don't quite absolutely know for certain. We don't care what they know and what they don't absolutely know. What we know is this: we've been here a long time. We have our creation story. And we know this place has sustained us and gives us our sense of belonging within the universe, within this land, and within the tribe. We had the use of nearly 10 million acres, part of it being majority of the state of Wisconsin and much of it in Minnesota. We're a very small tribe. Roughly when Jean Nicolet landed here, or the Europeans came, estimates were about maybe 2,000-3,000 people. But we were sandwiched in between two major tribal groups, the Chippewa, the Anishinaabe, and the Sioux from the plains, who were traditional enemies. So what that did to us was shape us and form us to be very astute, opportunistic, deliberative in finding ways and means to survive. We ended up being diplomats and tremendous negotiators. There isn't a whole lot in terms of Menominees being a fierce tribe going to war. We were too small. We'd have been wiped out. So we knew how to survive using the diplomacy and the negotiating skills that we were able to develop. So we lived here. Some say there were small permanent villages around the Green Bay area because of the fish in the wintertime that could always sustain us. But we still had the other 3 seasons, and during those 3 seasons, we were a tribe that broke into very small bands and moved from place to place, hunting and gathering. I don't like to say roamed because you always get that Indians roamed. No. Roaming in my mind gives the idea that you don't have a destination in mind. They had destinations in mind because their life and their survival depended upon it. So this whole land for us was our pantry. It was our pharmacy. It was our church. It was our chapel. It was our recreational facility. It was used for relaxation. The beauty of it raised our spirits to the heavens. So it filled us in terms and fed our spirituality, a tremendous deep spirituality for which the Menominee are known. So all that we needed came from this land. You want to go?
This was how we lived until the arrival of the first Europeans, a French man by the name of Jean Nicolet. In 1634, they were, of course, looking for riches for their king. What the Menominee, or rather the Menominee women did, however, was co-opt them and brought them into the tribe. Keep in mind, this was an important aspect because it led to a faster acculturation for the Menominee. It provided new ways to adapt, but more importantly, it helped the Menominee come to an understanding of the way these newcomers thought and felt about the earth, its land, and resources. And not to be left out, the Menominee were also interacting with other tribes.
It was important for us to come to an understanding of how these Europeans thought in terms of our land, the earth, and its resources. And it was important and very beneficial, and though it watered down the blood quantum, but I think it helped our Menominee people to adapt and be a little bit more flexible in terms of dealing with the Europeans by intermarrying with the French. The British, of course, only wanted to trade, and they used us as allies when necessary. And our troubles really started once this new nation began, when their lust for land became greater and greater and greater, where first they want to subdue us, then they want to exterminate us, then they thought, well, we might as well civilize them. And they finally managed, way back in the 1950s, to exterminate us, not by sword, but by pen. But as we've heard the Menominee story, we always managed to come back through our negotiations, through our deliberations, through our determinations. So the next one, Dr. Guido.
So these are what leads into the three major aspects leading to the Menominee Sustainable Development model. You're going to give a little more background on the historical events for now, and the culture and beliefs of the people and the values of Menominee.
Let's take the next slide. Oh, no, okay, wait. Back to this one then. There were three major things that I were able to pull out that led to Menominee going the route of sustainable development. First of all, there were historical events, things in history that happened to us. There was just our own culture and our own beliefs and our characteristics as a people that led to that. And in addition to that, there were our own tribal values that helped move us towards this ethic, even though at the time we didn't realize it was going to be a major, major buzzword in this part of the century. But the next slide, Dr. Green, please. With the coming of the Americans began the advent of treaties. This quote is taken from a historical marker at Lake Poygon, which is a lake south of here, near and a little west of Lake Winnebago. It's currently a boat landing, and it was called the payground because when we had to give up the land to sell the land to the American government, for the next 20 years, they paid us in annual installments. So in October of each year, you had Menominees coming from all directions from the north and moving down to Lake Poygon, where you were met by traders and all types of people, soldiers, all types of people ready to pounce on the Menominee to get the money from their annuity. We were forced to enter into a number of treaties with the federal government. We didn't like it, but we had to do it because we knew it was our only way of carving out a means of survival.
One of the major historical events in our history comes after another natural disaster, just like we've just recently had with a tornado. In the early 1900s, there was severe weather, created blowdowns, windstorm. I'm not sure they called it a tornado then, but the results were so disastrous that the mill that was built in Kashina Village was moved, or another mill was built in Neopet. You will see these two places on Wednesday. Kashina is near Shawano, which is a larger non-Indian town. Neopet is in the middle of the reservation, and that was started because we needed another sawmill to take care of all the timber that had been blown down. That's just what happened recently, and the amount of damage that was done is the annual allowable cut that the Menominee are allowed to harvest each year is 17 million board feet. This is double that. And this is also replicates another event in the 97-98 where that happened. So we have to learn to be respectable of the weather, of the uncertainty that happens. So planning is all well and good, but we have to be able to act like this. The reason the foresters aren't here is that there was a plan. There is a plan in place to take care of events like this. So they go into effect. It will be difficult for them to get in because of all the rain. The woods are wet. We don't want to, we have to be careful about how we take things out. New roads have to be made, and it will be difficult. The good news, if there is some good news, is to see the resiliency of the Menominee people, is to see what good things come from this. The other thing is it is hardwood, and we should be able to sell that. The other thing is we have been in, and we're worried about a down market. Many lumber companies across the country are going out of business. So we were not looking for a profitable year. The good thing is we will be able to sell this lumber and hold our own for a while. So that aside, in 1908, we had a similar circumstances, much worse. The forest, as a natural home of the Menominee, I'm trying to read this. The preservation of the forest should be the Indian's interest in his work. This is from Robert La Follette, one of the governors of Wisconsin in its growing years. The harvest of the crop of the forest product should be made in such a way that the forest will perpetuate itself. So one of the initial policies was that we cut the mature trees, we cut those that were diseased, we cut that which was dead and down, so that we could still have trees growing. As we cut now, we have regeneration plans so that they're not clear cutting. What's real difficult here is that while it looks like clear cutting and people come across with voices, and that's good because we don't keep track of ourselves, we don't take care of ourselves unless we know about things, and we holler and we scream and we do all those things because we're paying attention. But what is difficult is what becomes clear cutting in South America or clear cutting out in the Northwest is not the same conditions here. We are replanting, we're regenerating, we have a plan. What makes it real more difficult is that as the government comes in with its new standards and new laws, they have to apply to our local situation. While we protect our trees, while we think about our own people, we need to also think about the documents by which we operate. And that is in the state, we're changing those things, but it's not here yet, so that creates some of the difficulty. You gotta stop me, Rena, because I'm supposed to be talking about Robert La Follette. Okay.
Not a problem, since I prepared the presentation. If you were sitting in a high school history class and the question was, how did the Menominee get into sustainable management of their forest? All you'd have to write down your response is through the passage in 1905 of the La Follette Act. Very simple, very easy. Straightforward answer. That was the act that moved us in there. But it doesn't take into consideration the historical aspects that moved us there. It doesn't take into consideration that you're dealing with people who have a way of life and a very distinct culture that is virtually embedded within them. And aspects of this culture were a major dominant force in getting us into the sustainable management of our forest. The La Follette Act didn't just drop out of heaven by Senator La Follette, who was a senator from the state of Wisconsin and decided that this is what the Menominees needed. No, he was a feisty guy. That's why he had the nickname Fighting Bob La Follette. And in looking at that La Follette Act, there were certain provisions within there that were placed within it. But the historical aspect, keep in mind now we have moved very quickly into the era of Teddy Roosevelt and the great conservation ethic. So that's a historical aspect that helped move us towards sustainable development. And it was preceded by the Act of 1890. And this act came about at the request of Menominee people, Menominee leaders. And this act is important because in preceding the La Follette Act, it led to some of the provisions of the La Follette Act. The 1890 Act allowed the sale of timber, and it also set the amount cut at 20 million board feet, which pretty much still stands to this day, right, Dr. Greeno? So, next slide, I go into the provisions of the La Follette Act. There were a number of provisions to this act, but there were three main ones that you have to think about. It authorized the establishment of 3 sawmills on the reservation, something the Menominee were always asking for because they were awful farmers. They just couldn't make farmers out of us. So it authorized for 3 sawmills, and the organization or the agency that was given to oversee the implementation of this act was the US Forest Service. So instead of 3 sawmills, we got 1, great big one in Neopet. And they required that the federal government manage the forest operation on a sustained yield basis. That was the 20 million board feet every year. But instead, they were ending up cutting 40 million board feet a year. And it also provided that the Menominee be trained for the positions within the mill and the lumbering and logging operations, which was a very new and important concept that I'm certain came from our Menominee leaders. Next slide, Dr. Greeno. That's it. This is the back to the reservation. Remember I told you we had use of 10 million acres. By our treaty, we were finally forced on to a small reservation in northern Wisconsin. And Menominee leaders could see quite readily they were going to have some problems because the bands were used to moving all over, hunting and gathering. And this little plot of land was too small for that to sustain this group of people. Prior to that, you needed 10 million. What did we end up with? Like what, roughly 250,000 acres? So we were squashed in. And so our leaders then had to start thinking about, how do we go through this? How do we manage to survive? What do we do? The Menominee, at this point, remember too, we were still collecting the annuities. So in October, remember I said October we had to go to the pay grounds. You had to be there to get your money. October is a great time to be collecting and gathering nuts and berries and roots and hunting and getting ready for the coming of winter. So when they were pushed on this small reservation, they began facing starvation. I know the federal government was supposed to be feeding us and bringing us pork and all this good stuff to live on. But you really couldn't believe their promises, as our leaders found out. And our leaders began to never trust any federal government agent that happened to come to their borders to help them. So this sort of starts the thinking within the minds of people as to how do we survive? How does this small group of people continue to live?
One of the things I just wanted to point out, and I'll see if I can get it, Kashina. And the Neopet. This is where the most recent tornado came. Oh. Up through there. And your last statement was, I'm going where?
Just the dichotomy of trying to make us farmers when we wanted to be.
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
I put this slide in there to show you, just to show the early loggers and the late loggers. Now remember I said the government wanted to civilize us, and the best way to civilize us, they thought, was to make us farmers. But in those days, you didn't take soil surveys and all types of things. And the soil is not good for raising crops. It's too acidic because of many of the pine needles and the other aspects of the forest. So the Menominee were dismal failures at farmers. They tried, they did their best. And as a kid growing up, there were some of the most enjoyable times around our kitchen table when the elders would come and visit and sit around the table and talk about the times they tried to farm and how the agent was trying to help them, but they just could not make it as farmers. But what they did do and what they saw was the events happening around them, with the Europeans coming in and cutting down all the timber and clearing the farmland. They also saw that they could no longer then go about hunting and gathering in open fields. But they also realized that people were making money off of these logs, off of these timbers. And so began the inception of how do we get into that door to make some money to provide for our families and for the rest of the tribe.
So that was, I was thinking of our keynote speaker, thinking about that dilemma. There's natural resources. People come in, they make the promises, they do all these things. It's the same thing that happened to our people in the early 1900s. We had resources, but the Menominee in their wisdom said, you need to train us so we know how to do it. That is what education we ask for. And in the open, I live in a house that was built in those early 1900s, but it was built for Russians who would come over and work in our mills. So it took a long time for Menominee to learn to be able to be in control of their own mill, to be in control of their own forest. And that requires education. And that was the wisdom of the Menominee in asking, I know this from your model of sustainability at an international level, and you talk about ecological aspects, economical and social. But culture gets shoved into the social realm. Culture should be infused in all of those elements. We are part of the ecology. That is what we're about. We're part of the economics. Don't just come in, mine our resources, and take off and take the money off. And so it is about being social, whatever that means. But I think it's paramount in sustainability for people, for the indigenous people, to learn how to manage and be in control and learn how to do it ourselves. That's key. And I think that is what happened with the loggers. We learned how to log. We still don't have all Menominee loggers. And I think it's like education. We don't want to have all Menominee for everything, but we sure want 50%. And so we need to build up our own people as well as learning how to survive within our environment.
The Menominee saw what was happening with the timber. People were getting rich and quite wealthy on it, but yet they were starving. So they would always ask for permission to log, but they had to go to the agent, the federal government agent stationed on the reservation, to get that permission to log. It wasn't readily given. A lot of these contracts were given to non-Indian loggers from the outside. Timber was being stolen. They would hire Indians sometime to go in and steal timber for them and start fires to destroy some of the timber so that they could get the dead end down. So there were tremendous amounts of problems with that. The Menominees consistently pushed the envelope, asking for the right to do their logging and to control their own logging and timber harvesting activities. So what they were really after, what Menominees they were after what Menominees had before the advent of the Europeans. Those Menominee leaders were looking to get back to tribal control. So they made advances along the way, but it wasn't easy. Dr. Greeno says our first sawmill was built in Kashina. They finally got one. Was it one just for the dead and down, or could they take green trees also?
When they were in Kashina, they were doing the mature trees, the dead and down, the diseased trees. That had started way before the Neopet mill.
So there were periods where they could take just the dead and down, and they couldn't take and sell it for profit. What they had to do was take this lumber and build themselves frame homes or build your government buildings. That's what it was used for. Finally, they could get to the point where they could take the dead end down and then sell it. As I said, they kept pushing the envelope until they were finally allowed to cut the green timber and use that in terms of increasing and developing the tribal coffers. In 1871, the Menominee leaders petitioned the government for permission to harvest, cut, and log timber with the stipulation, this is what the Menominee leaders wanted. They said, we want to do this, but first of all, we want to be able to sell this lumber at a public sale. In other words, there was more demand so they could get bids and get more money on it. They also, as a part of our culture, said, we also want a poor fund set up. So the proceeds from this, a portion of it goes to support the infirm, the disabled, the women, the children who can't take care of themselves. A strong, strong aspect of our culture that still is in force today whenever you hear our legislature meet. So they also wanted a portion of the profits to be used for education. So way back then, they saw the need for education and learning how the Europeans worked and did things. And also they said, well, for agriculture. And the reason why they threw agriculture in was because they knew it sounded good to the federal government. So that convinced the federal government that, all right, they're ready to be farmers.
One of the things, as far as the Menominee always asking for things, we'd always ask for new technology. Many of the treaties talk about wanting gristmill, wanting blacksmiths. By the same token, I think the story of education tells a similar story with our forest. And that is, in the early treaties, we had always asked for education. And the thing was, I was really bringing home with our keynote speaker when he began telling us about the litany of ills, about the images that portray his country as poor, destitute, in poor health, uneducated. That is the same story we get with Indian people, especially in education. When people want something, they make the case for you. They make you look like you're poor and helpless because they have to come in and be the savior. Well, with education, you know, the story's been told, the litany has gone on for centuries. But in our treaties, we always had education, and when you look at the history of education, Indian education has been there almost at the forefront. In the state of Wisconsin, the Stockbridge-Muncie had the first formal teacher with a degree. On our own reservation in the 30s, we had one-room schoolhouses before many even existed before in the state of Wisconsin. So you can see we were at a par. We were being educated. We were making the same progress or more than many people in the state of Wisconsin. And so as we're coming in and we're asking for education around the turn of the century, that was not the first time. We've always been there. We've always been doing that. But what has persisted is the image that we're helpless and poor and that we need people to come in and take care of us. And therein lies our secret, the sustainability. Learn how to do it yourself. Learn how to take control. Learn how to preserve those valuable things that we believe in, taking care of other people, living within our means, within the community. And that is what the Menominee tradition is. That is what we know about how to take care of our forest.
Remember I said the federal government was very grateful that Menominees asked for education and agriculture. Federal government was very pleased by having the Menominee throw in the request for agriculture because they thought, all right, we are going to succeed making these Menominees farmers, because if we let them cut down and strip the forest, they'll have clear land and they will then become farmers. The problem was, remember I talked about the 1890 Act that preceded the La Follette Act. Okay, this act allowed the Menominee to cut green timber, and they could harvest it for sale. Didn't have to be used to just put up buildings anymore. And it allowed the Menominee then to take and scale, to advertise, and to sell their logs by bid, increasing their profit. And to transport them to the market, the Menominee were allowed to let them float down the rivers, the Wolf and the Fox and so on, the other rivers in the area. It also required, the 1890 Act required that the Indian agent on our reservation was required to hire Menominees when at all possible. Further, remember I said the fund that they wanted? 5% of the proceeds were used for per capita payments. Each individual Menominee received profit from those proceeds. As a kid growing up, we always looked early December for about our $120 stumpage payment. Always came about that time. So they had the remainder they put in trust. So by right around this period of time, early 1900s, the Menominee had close to $2,500,000 held in trust for them by the federal government. They were one of the richest tribes in the country because of their managing and working the forest. Being rich, what does that do to you? It brings all kinds of people in who want to relieve you of your money. So the problem then that started facing us on a grand scale was corruption. Corruption of the Indian agents, corruption of the peddlers and the people that came around to buy and sell, and the theft. And so this is what led up to the passage of the La Follette Act, and that stipulates the sustained yield management. But as I said, that's the easy response. There's other more difficult responses, and that's aspects of our culture that our government, that the federal government didn't stop to take into consideration. The first one was, next slide, Dr. Greeno. The first one was our religion. Menominees are a deeply, deeply spiritual people. That doesn't mean we're all in church on Sunday morning going to communion. That means we understand and recognize our relationship with a supreme being or a great creator. And so the Menominee as a people believed in a supreme being. But they also believed in lesser spirits that had certain powers over them. And they also believed that inanimate objects and animate had a spirit within them. And so and this belief affects your daily life. Because if I have to work with this computer, I'm going to wonder if that spirit is going to let me work, or do I have to throw it out the window? So what happens is you have all kinds of rituals and prayers and ceremonies that develop around this. And what else comes from that whole belief is just the tremendous value that you have in terms of respect. So this is a picture of a dream dance, but the Menominee had their own religion. There have been different things that have impacted it throughout the years. Primarily, remember I said they wanted to civilize us, so we ended up becoming Catholic because I think they drew this long straw to convert the Menominee. The other impact that carried forward and propelled us towards sustainable management of our forest was, of course, our law. This is our college logo. And our college logo consists of the three main clans of our tribe. We had a very, very complex clan system developed to show how we were to relate to each other within our communities, to show what activities we were to be responsible for. This clan system helped us maintain our relationships with each other through our codes of conduct and our various responsibilities for which we had to perform. So what this clan system did for us was help us, though, with all of the cultural upheaval around us. It helped us ensure a somewhat stable and functional environment. Our laws weren't written, but they were passed down as many Indigenous people through stories. They were taught and reinforced by education by the women within the clan or the band. They were taught through the rituals and the ceremonies. And all of this comes through the notion of respect, because the individual was so important and so necessary for maintaining the quality and the way of life of the tribe and also its survival. So the law that we had developed helped us maintain and move us towards sustainable development. You want to say anything about that?
Okay. We're going to get Marshall for this. Anyway, what has always happened all along with the Menominee, protection of their own resources. And, okay. So this is a picture of old Highway 55, old military road that went through the reservation. And in it lies a lot of our history. There used to be, when you talk about protection of the forest, there used to be trees in the middle of the road. And the asphalt that was laid down had to go around them. So Highway 55 became famous for that highway with the trees in the middle of the road. And just more recently, in the last probably 20, 30 years, had they been removed because they were really dangerous. I'm not sure where you were going with this slide, Dr. Fowler.
I can show you. The resources we held on within the land are what also helped move us towards the sustainable development ethic. Because our most important food resources as we lived on this land were, of course, the wild rice, the maple sugar, and the sturgeon that came up the rivers. And we had rituals and dances and prayers and laws to oversee the harvest of the wild rice, or collecting medicinal plants, certain prayers that had to be said, and so on. All of this was all part of preparation of these foods. We also knew, and as I said, remember we were astute diplomats and negotiators. And we knew enough to help other people. We weren't real that territorial. So we had a practice of, and there was a Menominee word for it, but what it meant was to let someone stay. And I think when they first met the Europeans, they thought these Europeans, they were just going to let them stay for a while on their land. I think that was probably the concept that was coming through. But Menominees would do that with other Indian tribes if they were facing starvation or food shortages and so on within their own lands. They could negotiate with Menominee and come and stay on Menominee land for a while until their needs were met. So they knew enough that they had to still protect these resources so that they could keep coming back and coming back, the sustainability aspect of them growing each year. So the Menominee were extremely cognizant of the ecosystem, not only of just the food, but the whole ecosystem of the entire forest and the land upon which they lived. And I always remember my dad was a forestry technician. He led crews out to go and mark the forests, and as he'd be throughout the woods, he'd always pick jingchang. But when he'd take us out there, he'd always say, make sure you bury the berry, so that the jingchang came back the next year. The whole idea, our resources pushed us and moved us to the concept of sustainable development. This is a picture of Chief Oshkosh. He's the one who negotiated and who is credited with getting us our current reservation. But we were very fortunate. And if you read Menominee history, for whatever reason, we have always been very fortunate that the astute leaders, the intelligent leaders come to the fore in times of crises. That doesn't mean to say that they were saints. They had their human flaws, but they still, through their culture, always considered the good of the tribe and looking out for those who were less fortunate within the tribe. Our government was essentially a democratic government. We had leaders. That were used for different purposes. We had peace leaders or leaders in war. And the interesting thing about these leaders is that if they were not all that articulate, they would use another tribal member to be their orator, to speak what was in their heart. So they had to tell the other person made the speech on their behalf, which was fine. That was a good practice. So when the government took away the opportunity of the people to select their own leaders, generally it was through hereditary line. But Menominee were very quick. If they recognized some guy coming up who wasn't real bright or figured they would be incompetent, they were very quick to change that. They didn't mess around. Survival of the tribe depended upon that. So it was essentially a very democratic organization with the bands that moved around hunting and gathering were very loosely tied to the entire tribe, and the entire tribe then would come together at times for various ceremonies and rituals and celebrations.
I think what Dr. Fowler is mentioning is that there were some basic values that Menominee had, similar to other Indian tribes, and that is the ability to get along, the supremacy of an individual in a group. You know, you functioned in a group, but you had your individual rights. But what is really important in all of this is that we're able to maintain and take those values and move from group to group. So it wasn't just something that one group had, but you're able to go to different communities and use that. And as today, communities define very largely and broadly to mean your committee group, your fellow neighbor, your country, your tribal group. But there's many different ways. What is neat about the Indian value is working together and respecting that individual right, that one person who you might think be wrong doesn't agree with you, just simply a different perspective. But you're able to function within a community, and these are saleable skills that I think has helped Indian people survive, is that concentration on those values. And so while we have had leaders, the Menominee were one of the first Indian tribes in the country to have their own form of government. Most tribes organized in 1934 under the Indian Reorganization Act. Menominee were a little different because we already had a government to do that. So a lot of times we pride ourselves on getting ahead. And a lot of times we have to kind of struggle and learn from others and work together to get where we need to go. And but it's that evolvement of leadership, it's that flexibility that we have that makes us strong, and I think it makes other Indigenous groups strong in being able to look out for the good of all people, not just a few.
This is a quote from Chief Oshkosh when they were coming back asking for more land. Notice the respect. Notice the dignity. Notice the determination that comes through within that quote, within his words. There was another aspect that our leaders, through their wisdom, managed to develop when they negotiated treaties, primarily for the land. One of the few Indian tribes to build in their treaties a right of refusal clause. So when they wanted to move us to Minnesota, they said, nope, we got to go check it out. We got to go see if it's okay. We got to see if it will support us. And if we look at it and we don't like it, we will not move. The right to refuse. Now that doesn't mean it always worked perfectly well for them, but they had that right. And they used it. It led them to a lot more problems, but they could still use it. Remember I said they were always pushing the envelope. To log, to harvest, to go to Washington, to whatever, you always had to have the agent's permission. Our leaders many times would just leave for Washington and leave an angry agent at home, not knowing where they were. So they pushed the envelope, they were determined, but yet there was always still, if you look through that and through our leaders' words, there's always an element of deep and profound respect within that. That value comes through very strongly.
Okay.
The other value that comes through that led us to the Sustainable Development Model is the tremendous need and the feeling the responsibility to take care of those who are unable to take care of themselves. We've always had a pot of funds available as a tribe to help those who are less fortunate. And there wasn't necessarily a stigma attached in terms of using that. It was part of our Menominee law. When you go back to when I said the law that we had, take the term warrior. When you use the term warrior, people think of someone ready to fight, ready to go off and defend, ready to go, whatever they go to war. Menominee's concept of warrior also included the fact that if you were a warrior, you were also responsible for the widows, for the little children, and for the good of the tribe. And if you were a warrior, you were the one who went ahead to find a perfect spot that could supply the needs to all that the tribe happened to have or the band happened to have at that point. That was their concept of warrior. It wasn't just someone ready to go off to war. It was someone who was also there to protect and take care of those who were unable to take care of themselves for whatever reason. So that value pushed us and moved us towards a sustainable development ethic.
One of the other things about sustainability, as the Menominee were working with treaties, were dealing with the treaty during the treaty period. What had happened is, anytime we had schools, any one time we had a business venture, we were not using government money. All this time it is money from the sale of the land. All the time it was money from profits from the mill, from the forest. And I think it's a misconception that people look, and the government presents that image. They present that advertisement that we're helping you. But at the same time, they have a hidden agenda. At the same time, they're using our money. And what difference is that today? As we look not only at our forests, not only at our schools, we look at the development, the recent business venture with casinos. People begin to line up at the door to get at our resources, to come and use our money. And if you look at all of the government write-offs you get for tax credit for this, if you work for a tribe, you get this, you get this. There are reasons people are being so helpful. And we need to know that we need to do these things for ourselves, and we have to be very, very cautious, learning from our history and remembering, and be sure to remember what our values are and who we're working for. And I think if we have anything as Indigenous people, it's our care and concern for others and taking care of others.
As all Indigenous people, we are concerned about the future. So we make sure we always, that's where the sustainable ethic comes from. Sustaining what we have so that it's there for future generations. That's still a very strong ethic within our tribe. That's why we haven't moved to clear cutting and finally becoming farmers. But those are just some of the values and some of the things we were able to hit on through this period, through this time. Next slide, Dr. Vino. But just to show you the conflict, when I started the college, I had Dr. Rowan, who has spent his life studying and researching Menominee. And I took this slide from one of his classes to show the inevitable conflict and the tremendously difficult time our Menominee leaders had in sustaining us and moving us through to bring us to this stage within our history. They can't see. But I have on there the Europeans and in philosophy as compared to the Menominee philosophy. So, next slide, Dr. Vino. This is the beauty, this is the land that raises our mind to the heavens. This is the land that sustains us. And I hope on Wednesday when you go to see it, you will see why our Menominee leaders fought so hard and were so diligent in maintaining and keeping this land for the Menominee people. We also look at it and know that we have to save it for future generations. Next one, Dr. Gano. So, in our conclusion, in this case, the message is, if you do not sustain the forest and environment, then you cannot sustain yourself. You cannot honor your ancestors. You cannot provide for the children of your children's children into the future's unknowable reaches. Sustainability and the Menominee's long-term well-being are one and the same. I thank you for taking the time to listen to us and dealing with Dr. Greenham and I dog and pony show that was just put together because Marshall had other obligations. But before I leave, I want to say this. Thank you so much for listening to our story. And I hope I have the opportunity to talk to many of you, because I think it's only fair that I listen to your stories, because I also need to learn from your story. So I'll be here all week, much as I can. And if I have the opportunity, I really do indeed, and I know Dr. Greeno does too, want to hear your story. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. All right, here we go. Some more. And I have presents for you.
You have presents for me.
Come here, Dr. Greeno. Thank you very much, ladies.
I wondered when you'd ever give me one of these. I'm giving them to others all the time.
We'll
Thank
tell
you.
you the inside joke. These are boxes that are produced from wood harvested from the Menominee Indian Reservation. And they're used locally to be made into cheese boxes. So Dr. Fowler gifts other people with these, and she's never gotten one herself. So there you are.
I'm a cheesehead, so but I won't wear it on my head.
You know, as Dr. Greeno and Dr. Fowler were talking, and identified religion and law, resource protection, leadership, respect for and responsibility for others, and concern for the future, I thought, wow, they're talking about that model of sustainable development that you see in our logo, that you see in your program, that 6 dimensions of sustainability that are centered on the need to make decisions balanced by the ties to the land. So please join me in thanking them for that tour through archaeologists always quibble, you know, some archaeologists say the Menominee have been around 40,000 years. Other archaeologists say they've been around 10, 12, 14,000 years. Personally, when it gets past about 1,000 years, my brain can't process it anyway. But I reckon that any people that has a song about hunting mastodon has been here a very long time. Well, my friends, it's time to have some lunch. And we're going to be doing that in the bare room of the Three Clans complex. That will be around the bend here. And then returning this afternoon, we'll begin to have the presentations that will allow Dr. Fowler to hear all those other stories. Stories from South America, Central America, Asia, the Philippines, Africa, even Australia and New Zealand. Pacifica is here. So we'll be returning, as indicated on your programs, back for the afternoon sessions. And let me just remind you that those of you that are doing presentations this afternoon want to make sure, if you need the PowerPoint, that you see Nathan standing up at the back. Make sure Nathan has a copy of your PowerPoint, and he'll get it loaded for you over the lunch hour. I want to thank all our morning presenters. Thank you all again for being here, and I'm really looking forward to spending this week with you. Many thanks.